The glass shattered against the marble floor before Vanessa Cole even set down the tray. Wine bled across white stone in a slow red line, and every man in the room turned to look at her instead of at the argument that had knocked it there in the first place. She had been working the private dinner for 3 hours, carrying plates and pouring drinks in a black uniform that made her invisible to men who paid good money to feel important. Invisible was exactly how she liked it. She had learned, in another life, that the person nobody watches is the person who sees everything. The mansion's dining room stretched long and formal beneath a chandelier that probably cost more than her annual salary. Its walls lined with oil paintings of men who had likely never worked an honest day in their lives. But the man at the head of the table was watching her now. Dante Moretti sat with his jacket still buttoned despite the late hour, his dark eyes flicking from the spilled wine to her face with an attention that made the back of her neck prickle. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room had already gone quiet the moment his gaze settled anywhere. Every man at that table, capos and soldiers alike, had spent the entire evening angling for even a fraction of that same attention, and none of them had received it. Vanessa had received it in under a second, over a broken wine glass, and she understood immediately that this was not a good thing. "Leave it," he said, when she bent to gather the broken glass. "Someone will clean it. Sit down a moment." "I'm working, Mr. Moretti," Vanessa said, keeping her voice level professional. The voice of a caterer who wanted no part of whatever tension had just broken a wine glass across his floor. "You flinched," Dante said. "When the glass broke, everyone else in this room jumped. You did not. You watched the door." Vanessa said nothing, though her pulse had already begun climbing. She had spent 4 years building a life where no one looked at her closely enough to notice things like that, and she had just failed, in under a second, in front of the one man in Staten Island whose noticing could cost her everything. "It's an instinct," she said finally. "Waitressing makes you jumpy about the wrong things." Dante's mouth did not move, though something behind his eyes did, a slow, careful recalculation. He gestured to the chair across from him, the one his cousin had vacated 20 minutes earlier after losing an argument about territory that Vanessa had heard every word of while pretending to refill water glasses. "Sit," he said again, and this time it was not a request dressed as one. It was simply a fact about to happen. She sat. She did not have a choice that would not draw more attention than sitting would. Dante studied her for a long moment, the kind of stillness she recognized instantly because she had once commanded rooms with exactly that same silence. It had been 4 years since anyone had looked at her the way soldiers used to look at her, waiting to see which way she would move before they moved themselves. She had buried that woman carefully. She had changed her name, changed her city, changed every visible surface of her life until the woman who once ran an entire syndicate out of Philadelphia became nothing more than a waitress named Vanessa, who poured wine at rich men's dinners and went home to a small apartment with bad heating. "You have a fighter's stillness," Dante said. "I noticed it the moment you walked in tonight. Most people move like they are trying to be somewhere else. You move like you already own the room and you are simply choosing not to say so." "That's a strange thing to say to your waitress," Vanessa said. "I say strange things when I am curious," Dante said. "And I am rarely curious. It has been a long time since anyone in this house surprised me." He studied her a moment longer, as if reassessing every word she had spoken to him over the course of the entire evening, searching for whatever detail he had missed the first several times. He watched her the way she had once watched enemies across a negotiating table, and Vanessa understood, with the particular clarity of a woman who had survived considerably worse rooms than this one, that whatever came next in this conversation would determine how safely she left the building tonight. Dante's cousin, a heavy-set man named Rocco who had lost his argument earlier and clearly wanted somewhere to put his frustration, leaned back into the doorway with a grin that did not belong on a face that dangerous. "Dante's got himself a new toy," Rocco said. "The pretty waitress with the poker face." "Careful," Dante said without looking at him, though the single word landed with enough weight that Rocco's grin faltered slightly. Vanessa kept her expression perfectly neutral, though internally she was already calculating exits, timelines, the particular risk of a room full of armed men who had just decided she was interesting enough to be noticed. Interesting was dangerous. Interesting was the exact opposite of everything she had rebuilt her life to be. She had spent the last 4 years perfecting a particular kind of smallness, the deliberate art of being forgettable in rooms full of dangerous men, refilling glasses and clearing plates with a rhythm designed to make eyes slide past her without landing. It had worked, mostly, in a dozen houses like this one, at 100 dinners exactly like this. Tonight it had failed in under 3 hours, and she understood precisely how much that failure might cost her before the night was through. The catering company she worked for served half the private families on the East Coast, families who valued discretion above almost everything else. And Vanessa had chosen the job specifically because discretion was the one skill she had never lost, even after walking away from everything else. She poured wine and cleared plates in rooms where men discussed murder the way other people discussed weather, and she had trained herself, meticulously, never to react to any of it. Tonight, a broken wine glass had undone 4 years of that careful training in a single unguarded second. "I should get back to the kitchen," she said, rising from the chair, though Dante's next words stopped her before she'd taken a single step. "There is a gym behind the main house," he said. "I keep it for exactly this kind of restlessness. I box 3 nights a week. It clears my head after evenings like this one." He gestured toward Rocco's retreating back. "You have the stillness of someone who has hit things before. I would like to see if that instinct is real or simply good posture." Vanessa felt something cold settle in her chest, the specific danger of a man testing a hypothesis he had no idea how correct it truly was. This was precisely the kind of attention 4 years of careful smallness had been designed to prevent, and yet here it was, arriving anyway, delivered by exactly the wrong man in exactly the wrong house. "I'm a waitress, Mr. Moretti," she said carefully. "Not a fighter." "Then this will be brief and harmless," Dante said, "and I will apologize for wasting your evening. But if I am right about you, I would very much like to understand why a woman with a fighter's stillness is pouring wine in my dining room instead of doing something considerably more interesting with her time." The room had gone quiet enough that Vanessa understood refusing was not, in any practical sense, actually an option available to her tonight. For years of careful invisibility, and one broken wine glass had unraveled the composure she'd spent that entire time perfecting. "Fine," she said. "1 round. Then I finish my shift." It was, she told herself, a small enough concession to make. 1 round of sparring against a curious rich man who had no real idea what he was asking to see. Something shifted behind Dante's dark eyes, satisfaction threading quietly through the careful stillness of his expression. 1 round, he agreed, rising from the table with the unhurried certainty of a man who had never once lost a fight he chose to have. She followed him through the mansion's back corridor toward the private gym, her mind working through the specific, complicated math of exactly how much of her former self she was about to reveal to a man whose entire life was built on knowing which secrets were worth killing for. The gym smelled of leather and chalk, a heavy bag hanging still in the corner, mirrors along one wall reflecting the low amber light of recessed fixtures. Dante shrugged out of his jacket, rolling his sleeves with the same economical precision he brought to everything, and Vanessa noted, despite herself, the faded scar tracing along his forearm, the kind of scar that came from something considerably sharper than an accident. "Gloves are in the cabinet," Dante said, nodding toward the far wall. "Take whichever pair fits. I do not expect this to require much protection on your part." "You should," Vanessa said quietly, before she could stop herself. Dante's eyebrow rose fractionally, the first genuine crack in his composure since she'd met him 3 hours earlier. "Confidence," he said. "Interesting. From a woman who claims she is only a waitress." She pulled on the gloves without answering, feeling the familiar weight settle into her hands like an old, dangerous friend she had sworn never to see again. 4 years since she had last thrown a real punch, 4 years since she had walked away from the life that made her exactly the kind of woman capable of matching a man like Dante Moretti in a private gym behind his own mansion, and every instinct she had buried was rising back to the surface with a speed that frightened her considerably more than Dante himself did. Dante stepped onto the mat first, rolling his shoulders, the particular loose readiness of a man who trained not for sport but because his life occasionally demanded it. "Whenever you're ready," he said. Vanessa stepped onto the mat across from him, settling into a stance so natural her body had assumed it before her mind had fully decided to allow it, weight balanced, hands loose but ready. The specific posture of a woman who had once trained soldiers twice Dante's size to fight considerably dirtier than any gym rule permitted. Something in Dante's expression flickered, recalculation happening in real time as he registered the stance, the balance, the particular stillness of a body that knew exactly what it was doing. "That is not," he said slowly, "a waitress's stance." "No," Vanessa agreed. "It isn't." He came at her fast, testing rather than committing, a jab meant to gauge reaction time more than land damage. Vanessa slipped it without conscious thought, the movement so automatic it startled her almost as much as it clearly startled him, and she answered with a controlled counter that stopped a half-inch from his jaw, close enough to prove the point without needing to land it. Dante went utterly still. "Again," he said, something sharp and focused entering his voice now, all trace of casual curiosity gone. She gave him more this time, a full combination he had to work genuinely to slip, and though he was skilled, considerably more skilled than most men she had trained in her previous life, she could see him recalculating with every exchange, understanding with increasing clarity that whatever he had expected to find tonight, it was not this. They traded exchanges for several minutes, both of them controlled, both of them testing rather than fighting to hurt, until Dante finally stepped back, breathing harder than the exchange alone should have caused, studying her with an intensity that had nothing to do with the fight itself anymore. He circled once, resetting his stance, and came at her again, faster this time, a combination meant to genuinely test her rather than simply gauge her reaction. Vanessa met it with a fluidity that surprised even herself, muscle memory from another life responding before her conscious mind had caught up, slipping his lead hand and countering with a body shot that made him grunt and step back a full pace. "You are not simply skilled," Dante said, resetting again, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple. "You fight like someone who has trained others. There is a teacher's economy in how you move. Nothing wasted." "I trained a great many people," Vanessa said, "before I decided that particular life wasn't one I wanted to keep living." "Then you understand exactly what I am looking at right now," Dante said, "and exactly how rare it is." He came at her one final time, and this exchange lasted longer than the others, both of them working harder, breathing harder, until Vanessa slipped a hook and answered with a combination that ended with her glove resting, deliberately, against his jaw exactly where a real strike would have landed. Neither of them moved for a long moment, the gym silent except for their breathing, the particular charged stillness of two people who had just discovered something about each other neither had expected to find in a private boxing ring. Dante finally stepped back, breathing harder than the exchange alone should have caused, studying her with an intensity that had nothing to do with the fight itself anymore. "Who taught you to move like that?" he asked. "I taught myself," Vanessa said, "and then I taught considerably more dangerous people than you how to do it properly." Dante's expression sharpened further, the particular focus of a man encountering a puzzle he had severely underestimated. "That is not a waitress's answer either," he said. Vanessa pulled off her gloves slowly, buying herself a few seconds to decide exactly how much truth this moment demanded. "No," she said finally, "it isn't." "Then tell me," Dante said, "exactly what it is." The silence stretched between them, charged now in a way that had nothing to do with the fight and everything to do with the precipice she was standing on. For years of careful reconstruction balanced against a truth that could either destroy the life she'd rebuilt or, somehow, connect her to a man whose world was disturbingly similar to the one she'd abandoned. She had rehearsed this exact moment in her head 100 times over 4 years, always as a nightmare, never once imagining it might arrive as a choice she made willingly, standing in a stranger's gym with sweat still cooling on her skin. "My name wasn't always Vanessa Cole," she said slowly. "For years ago I ran an organization out of Philadelphia. Not waitressing, not catering. A syndicate, Mr. Moretti, considerably larger than whatever territory you're currently arguing with your cousin about." Dante did not move. He did not speak. He simply studied her with the particular stillness of a man recalculating every single interaction they had shared since she walked into his dining room 3 hours earlier. "That," he said finally, "is the last thing I expected you to say tonight." "I didn't expect to say it either," Vanessa admitted. But you asked, and I've spent 4 years lying about who I am. I'm tired of doing it in a room where the lie might actually get me killed. Dante crossed the distance between them slowly, the same unhurried certainty that governed every movement he made, and stopped close enough that she could smell the cedar and gunpowder note beneath his cologne, close enough that the air in the gym seemed to thin considerably. "Why did you leave it?" he asked. "An empire like that does not simply walk away." "Because I watched it cost me everything that mattered," Vanessa said. "My brother, my name, every relationship I had that wasn't built on fear or leverage. I got out before it took the last thing I had left, which was whatever was still human in me." Something shifted behind Dante's dark eyes, recognition passing through them with a weight she recognized instantly, the particular understanding of a man who had paid similar costs himself and never once spoken of them aloud. "I know exactly what that costs," he said quietly. "I have paid it more than once." "Then you understand why I don't want this life again," Vanessa said. "Whatever this is, whatever tonight was supposed to become." Dante studied her for a long moment, something calculating behind his careful stillness, though it was calculation without malice, the specific attention of a man reassessing every plan he had made before this exact conversation. "I did not challenge you tonight to recruit you," he said. "I challenged you because I was curious, and curiosity is rare enough in my life that I follow it when it appears." "And now that your curiosity has an answer?" Vanessa asked. "Now I have a considerably more complicated problem," Dante said. "Because the woman I find myself unable to stop thinking about turns out to be exactly as dangerous as I suspected, and considerably more so than I could have guessed." The admission landed between them with a weight neither of them had expected the evening to carry, and Vanessa understood, standing in a gym that smelled of leather and chalk, that whatever door she had just opened by telling him the truth was not one either of them would be able to close again easily. She left the mansion that night without further incident, though the drive home felt different than every drive home before it, the particular unsettled quiet of a woman who had spent 4 years building a wall and had just deliberately knocked one brick loose in front of exactly the wrong man. The threat arrived 6 days later, and it arrived from a direction Vanessa had spent 4 years specifically guarding against. She was closing out the catering company's books late on a Thursday when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. A photograph. Her old Philadelphia apartment building, the one she'd abandoned 4 years earlier, with a single line beneath it. "We found you, V. Rocco isn't the only one paying attention now." Her blood went cold, colder than anything Dante's boxing gloves had managed to produce. V had been her name in another life, a name only a handful of people from her old organization had ever used, and someone from that old, buried world had just proven they knew exactly where she'd been living for 4 years. She called Dante before she had fully decided to trust him with the information, though something in the 6 days since the gym had already shifted the calculation of who she considered safe to call. "Someone from my old life found me," she said, the moment he picked up. "They know my real name. They sent a photo of my old apartment building." Dante's voice, when it came, carried none of the careful curiosity from their first conversation, only a flat, focused urgency she recognized instantly as a man calculating threat assessment in real time. "Come to the house," he said. "Now. Do not go home first." "Why would this be your problem?" Vanessa asked, though she was already gathering her things, already moving toward her car. "Because whoever is looking for you," Dante said, "found you 6 days after you fought me in my own gym. That is not a coincidence, Vanessa. Someone was watching that room, or someone connected to you has connections inside my own organization. Either way, this became my problem the moment it became yours." She arrived at the mansion 20 minutes later to find Dante waiting at the entrance himself, his usual composure fractured at the edges by a controlled, focused fear that told her exactly how seriously he was taking the threat. "Tell me everything," he said, leading her into his private study. "Who would be looking for you and why now?" Vanessa sat across from him, steadying herself before answering. "When I left the organization, I didn't just walk away quietly. I took information with me, enough to destroy several people who trusted me completely, insurance in case anyone ever came looking. I never used it. I never needed to until now." Who specifically would want you found badly enough to track you here? Dante asked. My former underboss, Vanessa said. A man named Salvatore Greco. He inherited what was left of the organization after I disappeared, and he has spent 4 years wondering whether I still have the information I took with me. If he's found me, it's because he's finally decided the risk of leaving me alone outweighs the risk of coming after me directly. Dante absorbed this in silence, something calculating behind his dark eyes, the particular stillness of a man building a plan in real time. In the days between the gym and this conversation, something had already begun shifting between them, small moments neither of them had named aloud. He had found reasons to walk past the kitchen when she was working the family's private dinners. She had found herself lingering after her shifts, staying later than the job required, aware of an attention between them that had nothing to do with wine glasses or catering contracts anymore. Then we end this before he finishes deciding how, Dante said finally. I am not in the business of letting threats mature into action, Vanessa. Not against people who matter to me. The confession, delivered so plainly and without hesitation, settled into her chest with a weight she had not expected an admission that small to carry. You barely know me, she said quietly. I know exactly the woman I fought in my own gym 6 days ago, Dante said. I know the woman who told me the truth about herself when a lie would have been considerably safer. I have built my entire life around learning who people actually are beneath what they show me. I already know who you are, Vanessa. The question is whether you are willing to let me help protect it. Something in his directness disarmed her more completely than the fight itself had, and she found herself, against every careful instinct 4 years of hiding had trained into her, choosing to trust the offer rather than retreat from it. There is something else, Dante said before she could answer. I have not been entirely honest about why I challenged you to that fight in the first place. I told myself it was curiosity about your stillness. It was not only that. I noticed you the moment you walked into my dining room, long before any glass broke on my floor. I have simply never permitted myself to act on noticing anyone in a very long time. Vanessa studied him, understanding fully, for the first time, the particular weight beneath every careful, controlled gesture she had witnessed from him since that first night. Why tell me this now? She asked. With an armed man possibly closing in on both of us? Because I have learned, the hard way, that honesty delayed too long becomes a regret instead of a choice, Dante said. I do not intend to make that mistake with you. Then help me, she said. But I'm not hiding behind you while you handle this. If Salvatore is coming, I want to be standing when he arrives, not tucked away somewhere safe pretending I'm still just a waitress. Something shifted in Dante's expression, approval threading through the tension still visible in his features. That, he said, is exactly the answer I hoped you would give. The confrontation came 2 nights later, faster than either of them had fully prepared for. Salvatore Greco arrived at the mansion's gates with 4 armed men, demanding a meeting under the pretense of territorial courtesy that fooled absolutely no one in the room. Dante received him in the main hall, Vanessa positioned deliberately at his side rather than hidden away in some back room, a choice that made Salvatore's composed expression flicker with genuine surprise the moment he recognized her. Salvatore said, his voice carrying old, familiar condescension. I always wondered what corner of the world you'd crawled into. A mafia boss's mansion. How fitting. Say what you came to say, Salvatore, Vanessa said, her voice steady despite the danger radiating from every armed man in the room. I want what you took, Salvatore said. The files, the accounts, everything you walked away with 4 years ago. Hand it over and I disappear. Refuse, and I burn down whatever life you've built here along with you. You will not be leaving with anything, Dante said, his voice carrying a lethal quiet that made 2 of Salvatore's men shift uneasily. This is my house. She is under my protection. Whatever business you had with her 4 years ago ends the moment you crossed onto my property. Salvatore's eyes moved slowly around the hall, cataloging exits, cataloging the number of Dante's men positioned at careful intervals along the walls, and something in his expression shifted from confidence toward the beginning of genuine calculation. You have no idea what she is capable of, he said to Dante. The woman standing next to you ran an organization that made grown men disappear without a trace. You think you know danger. You have no idea. I know exactly what she is capable of, Dante said. I fought her myself 6 days ago in my own gym. I am considerably less concerned about what she might do to me than what you clearly intend to do to her. Salvatore's hand moved toward his jacket. A motion so slight most people would have missed it entirely, but Vanessa caught it immediately, the old instincts from her former life snapping into place with a clarity that startled her. She moved before conscious thought could slow her down, closing the distance and driving her elbow into the nearest guard's throat, disarming him before his weapon had fully cleared its holster. The room erupted into controlled chaos, Dante's own men responding instantly, and Vanessa fought alongside them with a precision that made clear, beyond any remaining doubt, exactly how she had once commanded an entire organization. She moved like the fight itself was a language she had never truly forgotten, disarming a second guard while Dante closed the distance on Salvatore himself, the confrontation resolving with a speed born of two people who had both spent years being considerably more dangerous than the men who had come to threaten them. A third guard lunged toward Vanessa from the side, and she pivoted low, sweeping his legs out from beneath him with a motion so economical it barely looked like effort at all, following through with a strike that left him gasping and still on the marble floor. Across the hall, Dante had already disarmed Salvatore entirely, pressing him back against a column with a controlled, lethal patience that made clear exactly how little effort the confrontation actually required of him. It was over in under a minute, Salvatore restrained on the marble floor, his remaining men disarmed and subdued around him, and the mansion's hall settled into a heavy, ringing silence broken only by ragged breathing. Dante crossed to where Vanessa stood, studying her with something that was not quite surprise and not quite awe, a full and complete recalibration of everything he had assumed about the woman standing amid the wreckage of his own front hall. "You could have let my men handle this," he said. "I know," Vanessa said, her hands finally beginning to shake now that the immediate danger had passed. "I chose to fight anyway." "Why?" "Because I spent 4 years running from exactly this moment," she said. "And I decided somewhere in the middle of that fight that I was done running. This is who I am, Dante. I'm done pretending otherwise." Something in Dante's carefully guarded expression finally broke entirely, the controlled stillness he wore like armor cracking to reveal the depth of what lay beneath it. "I told myself, watching you fight in my gym 6 days ago, that keeping this professional and distant was the responsible choice," he said quietly, his men now moving to remove Salvatore and his crew from the property. "I have been lying to myself about that ever since." It was not a declaration of love. It was something more dangerous, an honest admission from a man who did not make them easily, and Vanessa felt the weight of it settle alongside the adrenaline and the fear and the fierce, unmistakable certainty that she had no intention of disappearing again. Not from this, not from him. In the days that followed, Salvatore's threat dissolved with the particular, permanent finality that men in Dante's world dealt in, details Vanessa did not ask for and suspected she did not want. Her double life ended not with exposure or ruin but with something closer to integration, Dante's organization absorbing the specific, considerable value of a woman who understood territory and leverage and loyalty as fluently as anyone in his own inner circle ever had. She did not return to catering. She did not need to. Dante offered her a role advising his organization directly, a position built on exactly the skills she had spent 4 years trying to bury, and she accepted it not out of dependency but because pretending to be smaller than she was had never actually made her safer, only invisible in a way that had nearly gotten her killed the moment someone finally looked closely enough. Rocco, who had first noticed her at that dinner table and called her Dante's new toy with such careless condescension, treated her differently now, a wary, deliberate respect replacing the earlier mockery entirely. He found her in the kitchen one afternoon, weeks after Salvatore's men had been dealt with, and studied her for a long moment before finally speaking. "I owe you an apology," Rocco said, "for that first night. I didn't know who I was talking about." "You didn't know who anyone was talking about," Vanessa said. "That was the point, Rocco. I built that ignorance carefully." "Well," Rocco said, "consider it broken permanently. Nobody in this family underestimates you twice." He paused at the doorway, glancing back once. For what it's worth, Dante hasn't smiled like this in years. Whatever you did to him, keep doing it. It was weeks later, in the same gym where this had all begun, that Dante finally set down his gloves and studied her with the same careful, deliberate attention he had first shown her the night she broke a wine glass across his marble floor. "I owe you an acknowledgement," he said, "not simply for the fight in this room, but for what you have become to me since, which I have avoided naming directly for considerably longer than either of us should have tolerated." "That sounds like a confession, Dante," Vanessa said, using his given name without hesitation, watching something warm and unguarded pass behind his dark eyes at the sound of it. "It is," he said. "I do not offer them easily. Consider this one an event." He did not say the word love. He did not need to. He simply stepped onto the mat across from her, the same way he had that first night, and settled into a stance that was no longer a test or a challenge but an invitation, an image far more honest than any declaration could have offered. "No gloves this time," Dante said, and Vanessa noticed, for the first time since she had met him, something in his expression that resembled genuine ease rather than careful calculation. "No gloves," Vanessa agreed, crossing the mat toward him. "Though I still expect you to defend yourself properly, Dante. Old habits." "I would expect nothing less," he said, and the corner of his mouth moved in something that was, finally, unmistakably close to a real smile. Vanessa understood, standing across from him in the quiet gym, that some truths did not require grand pronouncements, only the daily, deliberate choice to remain exactly where you had decided to stand, gloves and all, in a life she had once run from and had somehow, finally, chosen to run toward instead. Outside the gym's tall windows, the mansion sat quiet under a clear winter sky. No armed men at the gates tonight, no threat waiting in the wings, only the ordinary, hard-won piece of two people who had both survived considerably worse than a broken wine glass to arrive at exactly this moment.